Hello, my little goblins and ghouls. Welcome to a very special Halloween episode of BTT. We're going to travel all the way to Boise, Idaho today to look at the famous murder house, also known as the Chop Chop House, also known as Macabre Manor. Brace yourselves because this one is a bit on the gory side. In fact, if you're triggered easily, especially by violent murders, this one may not be the one for you. If you're willing to brave the morbid tale with me, though, be prepared to not only hear a gruesome tale of murder, but of the haunting that has been going on in the house as well. Are you ready? Then take my hand, hold it tight, and let's walk into the darkness together. On June 29, 1987, a 21-year-old man named Preston Murr attended a funeral in Boise, Idaho. After the funeral, those who attended decided to go out for a couple of drinks, and Preston went with them. Now, at some point, and for some unknown reason, a fight breaks out between Preston and two other people that also attend the funeral. The police are called to the scene, and when they arrive, they cite all three of them for disorderly conduct. The police report does claim that all three parties were intoxicated at the time of the citation. Now, after this, Preston goes to his sister's apartment where he was staying, and there he supposedly receives an anonymous call from someone threatening to kill him. Preston immediately called the cops to report it, then called his 37-year-old friend Daniel Rogers to discuss it and maybe try to figure out who the anonymous caller was. They agreed to meet up at a Circle K, which is a convenience store / gas station. So, Daniel, Preston, and another friend of theirs by the name of Darren Cox, who was 21 at the time, all meet up at this Circle K. When Daniel and Darren arrived, they found Preston inside of a payphone and holding a baseball bat. The three men discussed the situation for a short time there and then decided to go back to Preston's sister's apartment to discuss it some more. They also began to talk about guns that someone had stolen from Daniel, who could have done it, and where they could be. It seems that Preston had information on an apartment where these weapons could be at the moment, and the trio set out in Daniel's car to go to the apartment and get the guns back. They did, however, make a stop at a house at 805 West Linden Street to pick up a different gun. Now, since that was Daniel's house, we're going to assume that the gun also belonged to Daniel. So after picking up the gun, they hop back in the car and continue their way to the apartment. We kind of lose track of them for a little bit here. We don't really know if they got to the apartment or if they found the guns or got them back. But the story picks up after they've returned and are back at Daniel's house again in his basement. So the three men have also started to argue for some unknown reason, and one of them shoots Preston in the shoulder during the altercation. It's not certain how Preston gets away from the others or out of the basement, but he does and begins to knock on neighbors' doors and scream for help. One of the neighbors does hear him, and as he walks towards the window to look out and see what's happening, he hears someone say, "Let go of me," followed by an agonized yell. When the neighbor reaches the window, he sees Preston chased by someone who catches up to him and drags him back to Daniel's house. So now we're going to stick with the neighbor's side of the story for a bit, because once he sees this, he calls the police and explains everything he saw and heard. He also reports that he can see blood smeared on his screen door. After a short time of waiting for the police to arrive, he notices two people over at Daniel's house moving around the porch and hosing it down. He continues to watch them as he waits for the police, but after a while the commotion ends and it's apparent that the cops aren't going to show up. So he gives up and goes to sleep. Yeah, sleep. It seems our neighbor has nerves of steel here. But anyway, the next morning he wakes up and peeks out the window again. This time he sees an unknown brown sedan parked right in front of his house. He watches it, waiting for it to drive off, and when it finally does, he calls the police again. This time they do show up and not only find the blood on his screen door, they find more splattered on the sidewalks and at least on another neighboring house. They close off the neighborhood and get a search warrant for Daniel's house, in which they find a lot more blood, especially around the basement area. They also find a gun that was used to shoot Preston stashed in the cabinet, as well as a bullet hole at the top of the basement staircase and a bullet fragment lodged in his dryer. They found 13 pounds of marijuana and a hell of a lot of cash. What they don't find is a body. So they arrested Daniel for possession of controlled substances and other drug-related charges because at the time the possession of marijuana was illegal. So the cops now have a ton of blood, but no real idea of what happened to Preston. Until a week later when everything changes. Snake River is a 1,078-mile long body of water that flows down from Wyoming all the way down to Washington and the Columbia River. On its way there, it also flows down the Idaho-Oregon border. Now, somewhere along that border, there's an area called Hell's Canyon, and in it sits Brownlee Reservoir, known to fishermen as an awesome spot for fishing. Now, a week after the incident with Preston happened, two 13-year-old boys go fishing in the Brownlee Reservoir, and to their surprise, instead of finding fish that day, they find body parts. The boys reported finding arms and fingers in the river, and the parts are recovered and identified as Preston's, which is just what the police needed to charge Daniel. By now, they also have Darren in custody, and they both begin to blame each other when questioned about what happened that night. Eventually, Darren seems more convincing since he provides them with details that lead to evidence. They charge Daniel with first-degree murder and Darren with first-degree murder by aiding and abetting. So, according to what Darren tells the cops and what they were able to piece together, this is what happened after Preston was dragged back into Daniel's basement. Darren said Daniel used the gun to shoot Preston in the head and then with an axe and knife dismembered Preston into 13 pieces. They put those pieces into trash bags and the bags into Daniel's wife's brown Grand Prix, which was probably the brown sedan the neighbors saw parked at his house. They then drove down to Weiser, Idaho, which is where the Idaho-Oregon border is, and is about 75 miles from Boise. Once there, they dumped most of Preston there in the Brownlee Reservoir. They did realize that a few of the body parts wouldn't sink, so they scooped those back up into the bags and dumped them in a bluff that wasn't too far away. On the way back to Boise, they went down to a dumpster behind the convenience store in Meridian, Idaho, which is about 65 miles away from Weiser, and they disposed of the bags, gloves, clothing, and anything else that had Preston's blood in it and could give them up. Daniel and Darren ended up having separate trials in which they both continued to blame one another. Daniel Rogers ended up sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Darren Cox was convicted as an accomplice in the murder and was only sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released in 1993. Now, I think the main reason for the big year gaps between sentencings is not only the help Darren gave in finding evidence, but also because Daniel had actually been convicted of second-degree murder back in 1977 and had served 5 years in a California prison. Darren had a clean background, or at least nothing close to what Daniel's looked like. So, following all of this, Daniel's wife does get a divorce and sells the 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house to a relative named James Howell in the year 2000. The house has become extremely neglected since then. It looks old, dirty, and truly haunted now. Daniel has tried to appeal multiple times and has been rejected every single time. Now, on to the supernatural part of this. James has stated that the house is not haunted in the slightest. He has even rented the home out through the years, but many of those who have stayed in the house say that there is definitely something off about it. Some have even seen things. Besides the rumor that there is this lady in gray who looks out of one of the second-story windows, there's a lot of talk about the basement and the creepiness of the house in general. Michelle Hart, the author of 2 different articles on the subject for the Boise, Idaho radio station that she works for, called 107.9 Light FM, has not only found people who have their own stories with the house, but has visited it herself in order to get a picture for one of these articles. The first time she drove to the house, she was so creeped out by it that she never got down. She later returned with someone else to take the picture. She said, "There are multiple vehicles parked in the property, what appears to be trash piled on the second-story window, broken windows, and debris all over the front porch. In these articles, Michelle quotes people who have lived in or have been involved with the house, like Diane Davis, who lived there with her two daughters from 2008 to 2009, and said, I was never afraid or felt it was haunted, but there are so many stories that everyone is convinced it is. She claims that they never experienced any activity in the house, but that they did feel that something wasn't right with the basement. Her daughters quoted saying, I feel there is something kind of there, kind of not. When I go in there, it's like, get me out, because I feel like something was there and I didn't want to go near it. A woman named Rachel R., who had been considering buying the home back in the 2000s, said, I remember going to look at it and doing a walkthrough and just being so creeped out by just being in the home. It looked like it had been abandoned, and the basement was by far the creepiest part. I can remember exactly what it looked like and get anxious thinking about it to this day. Joe W. was a former BSU student, and he said that he and a group of friends lived there for 2 semesters in the early 2000s. He claimed that the basement was creepy and had a weird feel. We would take people down there to scare them. I never saw any ghosts, but you could tell something wasn't right. It was a fun place to stay for a bit. So, we know these people are definitely creeped out by the house itself and super creeped out by the basement, right? But this could simply be from bad energy left behind by the extremely violent act that occurred, or maybe just from knowing what happened there and psyching themselves out before even getting there. However, there also have been accounts of people who have actually seen things in the home, like Christy W., who said, when I lived on Leadville when I was a kid, I saw a woman in an upstairs window banging on it. It looked like she was screaming, but there was no sound. I'll never forget that. Dan D. also claimed, we were upstairs in one of the side bedrooms when we heard someone walk up the stairs. Didn't think much of it, thought it was the roommate. But then we heard it again and we never heard anyone go downstairs. So me and my friend B went to check it out. We thought it was someone breaking into the house. We check everything out and don't see anyone, so we go and stand on the porch to let whoever was there know we're watching if he comes back. It was late, maybe midnight, and I kept seeing shadows out of the corner of my eyes. I just thought I was tired until B asked me if I was seeing this stuff too. We figured out we weren't looking for a person. I step out into the front yard and looked up into the main bedroom upstairs. In the window is a big black oily looking thing. I doubt what I'm seeing until it moves back towards the dresser, stops, goes to the door, and disappears. I see a mirror sitting next to the door on the porch, and it catches my attention for some random reason. I'm looking in the mirror and see a ball of oily blackness coming down the pillar. Of course, I'm still doubting myself until the little ball gets huge. It takes up the whole reflection of the mirror, and the thing goes through me. It was the weirdest, most disturbing thing I have ever felt, and just typing it makes me feel it again. It's like ice fingers sinking into my shoulders. Being the tough guys that we were, we ran down to the Chevron and called our other friends in the house to tell them to get the car keys and get out. I never went back to that house, but B continued to live there for a while longer. Feel free to doubt me and call me crazy. I don't care. He doesn't mention if B also saw the black ball thingy or if they saw anything else while living there after that incident happened. I think there is definitely more to this story, and it's not just Preston Murr that's haunting the home. Maybe there was something there all along and no one paid enough attention to notice it, or weren't open enough to the idea to see it. Maybe it was Preston's violent death that attracted it to the home. Regardless, if you ever visit Boise's murder house, try your best not to go into the basement alone. That's it. Let me know what you thought of today's story. Was it Halloween worthy or just meh? Do you believe the Boise murder house is haunted? I'd love to hear if you guys have ever been creeped out by a place or if you have any ghost stories of your own. Don't forget that you can help my small channel grow by sharing it with others who love scary stories too. And remember, to like if you liked and subscribe if you want more. See you next time.